and enjoy. I'll say again today what I've said the last few weeks in a row, and that is that Jesus said, as he's quoted in John chapter 10, verse 10, that the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I came that they may have life and have it to the fullest. The thief, the people who promise that things are going to be good if you go this way, if you do things my way, if you follow me, if you take these instructions, you're going to have that full life that you always wanted. They just come to steal and kill and destroy. They just come to exploit you, to take from you, to sucker you in, to feather their own nest. And Jesus talked about how people did that before him, but they weren't legit. And we as Christians know and recognize from the Bible that the ultimate person who does that is the evil one. Is this evil force, this evil being called the devil or Satan, this invisible tempter, manipulator, adversary who wants to steal and kill and destroy your life because he hates the God in whose image you were made. And he wants to break that God's heart, and he wants to dominate you, and he wants to wreck your life. But Jesus came, the Son of God came and became a human being that we might have life and have it to the fullest. He died on a cross, a death he did not deserve, and he rose to a new life as the beginning of a new creation where things will be perfect someday. He is the first fruits of that, is the beginning of the harvest of that, to prove that the life that he came to give us is a life that's real, that's eternal, that's wonderful. And we're seeing here in these weeks here in the fall of the different ways that the devil wants to steal and kill and destroy us, but then the opposite ways that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, wants to give us life to the fullest, life that overflows. The brokenness that we have, that we suffer in now, of different kinds, is a form of bondage. It's a form of bondage. Whatever that brokenness is, whether that is brokenness in your body, in the form of physical sickness, physical hurt, brokenness with yourself, of fear, of depression, of self-loathing, whether it is brokenness in your relationships with other people, brokenness with your spouse, brokenness with your kids, brokenness with your parents, brokenness with your sisters, brothers, friends, co-workers, or whether it's brokenness in your relationship with the world, brokenness with employment, brokenness with money, with assets, with debt, brokenness in trying to work through a system to be able to get the what is entitled to you, whatever that is, brokenness in your work environment. You know, wherever the sources of brokenness are in your life, brokenness is a form of bondage, and the devil wants to keep us bound. There's this really interesting little healing story in the Gospel of Luke. There's many stories in the four Gospels, which are the first four books of the New Testament. The Bible has two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The first four books of the New Testament are called the Gospels. They are biographies of Jesus. And there's a lot of stories of Jesus healing people in those books. And there's this one in the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel that Luke wrote about Jesus, that there is a woman who there was an evil spirit that had caused her to be physically broken. She was bent over and could not straighten out for 18 years. And when Jesus healed her, he said to the people who were watching, who were questioning his methods, he said, "Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" Jesus described that physical brokenness, that physical deformity that she had as a bondage that the devil wanted to keep her in. And the devil wants to keep all of us locked in our brokenness. Whatever that brokenness is, he wants to keep us bound to it. He wants to keep us imprisoned in it. But Jesus wants to set us free. Now, Jesus' timing, God's timing of setting us free can be mysterious. His methods for doing so can be even more mysterious. But when God makes up his mind to heal you, the devil can't stop him from doing it. When the Son of God, Jesus Christ, makes up his mind to heal you, the devil can't stop him from doing it, but he can persuade you to prevent you from healing. He can persuade you to prevent your own healing, so that even though the devil can't stand in the way of the healing that the Lord wants to do, he can persuade us to avoid the very healing that we say that we want and that we think that we want. There are ways that he can tempt us, that he can deceive us, or he can bind us to our brokenness. Now, I want to make very clear right now that when I say that the devil wants to keep you from healing, I am not saying that if you want healing in your life right now and that healing is not coming, that the only explanation that there can possibly be for that is that the devil wants to keep you bound in it. There are actually lots of different explanations. If there's brokenness in your life that you want to be healed, again, whether that's brokenness with body, with self, with others, or with the world, there are different reasons that that can happen. There are different reasons why your healing is not coming as quickly as you would like. Some of it is quite simply that God's ways are not our ways. His timing is not always our timing. For us, we want it and we want it yesterday. And God might see some good reason to put it off till tomorrow, or a year from now, or a decade from now, or wait until Jesus comes back. Okay? And we need to trust him for his timing. There are other times that the reason that we are experiencing brokenness is really as discipline from the Lord. That there is something where we are stubbornly resisting him. We are stubbornly in sin. And that the brokenness that we're experiencing is actually God's wake-up call to us to repent and to go the right way. But there are some times that the reason that we are not experiencing the healing that we want to experience is because the devil has convinced us to actually short-circuit our own healing and to actually avoid it. And there's two ways that he persuades us to do this. There's two ways that the devil persuades us to keep ourselves from our own healing that we're going to talk about today from two different stories in the Bible. And there may be more than two ways that the devil does this, but there's two we're going to look at here today. And the first is in the Gospel of John. I invite you to take your Bibles that you've brought with you, and if you didn't bring a Bible with you, pull the one that's out in the seats there in front of you, or take the Bible app on your phone and open up to John chapter 5. Again, John is the fourth book of the New Testament. You might need to look at the table of contents to do this. And I know that you all have your trusty timelines, Bible timelines. I just want to point out that when we're talking about the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you take this timeline, you go to the back side of it that looks like this. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all take place in the gold section that is right here. This gold section right here is where it happens. So most of the New Testament is at the end of this very, very long timeline. And so that's where we are. We're in John chapter 5, and we're going to look at a man that Jesus wants to heal. And as we look at his story, we're going to see that one of the things, we're going to see one of the obstacles that the devil convinces us to fall into that get in the way of our healing from our brokenness. So here in John chapter 5, beginning at verse 1, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" I'm going to stop right there for a second. Jesus is walking here in this area where there's lots and lots of sick people. Lots and lots of sick people. And the reason that they seem to be there, by the way, is that there was a rumor, there was a belief that from time to time an angel would come and would miraculously cause the water in this still pool to get stirred up and to kind of roil around. And then once that happened, first person into the pool got completely healed. And that's why people were all hanging around there. And so anyhow, Jesus is here where all these sick people are. And he picks out one person of all the people that are there and asks him this question: do you want to get well? Jesus doesn't take it for granted that this man wants to get well. Now you'd think that he would. Why else would he be there, right? But Jesus doesn't assume that the man really wants to get well, because sometimes that is a way that the devil prevents us from our own healing. We think we want to get well, but we actually don't want to get well. And we're going to see an example of how that can happen here. So here we are. Jesus says to this man, do you want to get well? And the guy says, sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. So Jesus says, do you want to get well? The guy says, yeah, I do want to get well. That's why I'm here. I would be well by now if there was somebody to help me get into the pool. Jesus says, okay, well, as long as you want to get well, bang, you're well. Okay? So the guy stands up. It's a miracle. And he walks away. Now, continuing on. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. The Sabbath was the Jewish day of rest, still is the Jewish day of rest, and to a certain extent, with some variations, it's also a Christian day of rest. And so they said it is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. That would be work, not rest, in their minds. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. So they asked him, who is this fellow? Who told you to pick it up and walk? The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Now, I don't know exactly what was going on in the man's mind here in this story when he does this. Certainly, he didn't seem to know who this guy was who said, get up. And then when Jesus comes back and finds him and talks to him, I guess the guy found out who he was. But the man who is healed did not have to report Jesus to the authorities. He did not have to go back to the people who said, who told you to do this, and tattle on Jesus. But he decided to do that. Now, maybe he was doing that just to be a good citizen, but I do find it very interesting, as you can see in the very next verse, verse 16, so because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. And I'm inclined to believe that this guy who reported Jesus knew that that might happen. And I also find it interesting that he reported Jesus to the authorities right after Jesus told him, stop sinning or something worse will happen to you. You know, things were all well and good for this guy when all Jesus was offering him was, you can stand up and walk. But once Jesus said, knock off your sinning, Jesus was a less appealing figure to this man at this point. And that's an interesting thing, because you see what Jesus wants to do is to really make the man well. I mean, totally well. Like 100% well. Like no problems left with him at all. Jesus starts with healing his physical brokenness. But Jesus doesn't want to stop there. He knows that if this guy goes on living his sinful life without repenting, without turning back to God, without being forgiven, then what's that going to do? It means that for the rest of his natural life, he's going to be walking around. And then he's going to die and face judgment, and he's going to go to hell. So how is his walking around for a few years on earth really going to help him? See, Jesus wants healing so bad. He wants your healing and my healing so bad that he won't stop where we often want him to stop. Jesus wants to heal all of you, not just the part of you that really bothers you. Because, see, sometimes there are hidden advantages to being unwell, or to being well with part of ourselves but unwell with other parts of ourselves. See, sometimes familiarity can keep us from wanting to get well. Our brokenness, wherever it is familiar if we've had it for a long time. And as much as we might not like that brokenness, in whatever dimension of our life we have that brokenness, to not have the brokenness is change. And change can be scary. Change can be something new. As much as we might want to get healed, we might be afraid of what the consequences will be when we are. Community is another hidden advantage to being unwell. Sometimes when you are broken, it means that you have good friends with other broken people. And that way you can share in your brokenness. Your brokenness is something that you have to talk about together. You end up going to the same places because you're broken. You end up doing the same behaviors because you're broken. And you have that in common. But if you get well and they're still broken, you might lose a friend. If your brokenness leads you to drink every Friday night to excess, and in fact, if your drinking to excess every Friday night is part of your brokenness, then when your brokenness is healed, then you're not going to be able to see those friends on that Friday night where they're all going to be getting hammered and you're not. And so that can be an incentive to stay in that brokenness, right? Because you still want to go where everybody knows your name. And you don't want to swap that for some other place. Sympathy can be another reason that we don't really want to get well. As long as we're broken, other people can feel sorry for us. We might have made an entire little cottage industry out of other people feeling sorry for us. And once we get well, then there's no reason for people to feel sorry for us anymore, and we're not really sure what to do with that. Identity can be a reason that we don't really want to get well. We can be so used to being the person with blank, whatever the problem is, that we don't really know who we'll be anymore if we don't have that thing. And less responsibility can be another hidden advantage to being unwell. As long as I'm unwell, I don't have to do as much. As long as I'm unwell, people don't expect me to be as responsible. People don't expect me to pick up other stuff. People don't expect me to do other stuff because if I do, I can't handle it. Okay? Now again, I'm not saying that these are all reasons that I'm not singling anybody out to say you are not well because of these things. I'm just saying that in the world, I have run into, and you have run into, people who have had these as the hidden advantages to being unwell that make actually being healed not a completely positive proposition. In other words, that there's a cost to be paid. There's a cost to be paid. Now, the benefit might be worth the cost, but the benefit of healing may come with a cost. And this man here is an example of somebody who wanted to get well, but only kind of well. I want to be physically well as long as I'm not spiritually well. And sometimes God will allow that, just like Jesus did here. Jesus actually gave the man what he wanted, and then when he came back to try to do more, the man said no. There's other times that God in his mercy will not give us what we want. There are times that we want to get better here, but not there. You know, I want to get better with my body, but I don't want to get better in my relationship with my spouse. Or I want to get better with my finances, but I don't want to get better with my depression, you know, or whatever. And sometimes we pray and pray and pray and pray and pray about the thing that we want to get well, and God doesn't answer, and we say, where is God? And God's reasoning is because I want you to be well, completely. And until you're willing to let me heal you 100%, I'm not going to heal you 10%. Be willing to be healed, be willing to be changed. The devil wants to convince us that the cost of getting well, of getting completely well in all aspects of our lives, is a cost that is too high for us to pay. And we would rather not have it. But if we believe that our God knows what's best for us, if we believe that the complete healing that he wants to give us is worth it, even though the pain of change is too scary, we're going to find a life to the fullest, the one that Jesus wants to give us. So, the first way that the devil wants us to prevent our own healing is to convince us that we don't really want to get well. And if we trust God to make us completely well and to cooperate with him the whole way, we'll find abundant life. The second way that the devil wants to convince us not to get well is he wants to convince us not to follow directions. That we don't want to follow directions. We want to do things our way. We don't want to take somebody else's advice. And to look at this, we're going to go to the Old Testament, the book of 2 Kings. Now again, with 2 Kings, you might need to hit the table of contents for that. But I'll give you a hint. There's a couple of books called 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then a couple of books called 1st and 2nd Kings, and then a couple of books called 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and they're about a quarter to a third of the way through the Bible, if you're going from front to back, okay? So we want to go to 2 Kings chapter 5. And again, to take out our trusty timeline, again, I'm on the back page of the timeline. We are in the black section, okay? We are in the black era of the timeline here, looking at a guy named Elisha. And you can actually find Elisha along this black little line that busts out from the purple line right about there. That's where Elisha the prophet was doing his thing. And Elisha the prophet was a prophet in this country called Israel. There's a very important group of people called Israel that we see throughout the whole Bible, and even to this day. And at this point in history, this whole group of people called Israel existed under two different governments. The government in the north kept the name Israel. The government in the south had the name Judah, after the dominant tribe that was there. Well, Elisha was a prophet in this northern kingdom called Israel. And Israel had a rival just to its north called Aram, A-R-A-M. And Aram is in modern-day Syria, okay? And the Arameans and the Israelites would fight a lot. They would fight all the time. And they had a border that would go back and forth, as one side would take over part of the border, and then the other side would take away part of the border. And sometimes what they would do is, instead of sending a whole army to conquer a city, is they would just send an army on a raid, where they would go into the other side's territory, and they would kill a bunch of people, and they would take a bunch of stuff, and take a bunch of people captive as slaves, and then go back to their own territory. And they go back and forth. It was a very dangerous and difficult place to live if you were on the border between Israel and Aram. They were fighting like cats and dogs all the time. So that's the setting here for what we're going to see in 2 Kings chapter 5 with a man, an Aramean man, not an Israelite, but one of Israel's enemies who had some brokenness that needed to be healed. So 2 Kings 5. Now, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master, and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, leprosy, by the way, could refer to any number of different skin conditions at that time, okay? But the point about leprosy was that in that place and time, and even in many places and times in the world today, leprosy was not just a physical problem, a skin disease that was painful, that was difficult, that was ugly. It was also something that led to social exclusion. So lepers were ostracized. You couldn't be seen in public if you were a leper. You had to be away from everybody else. It was seen as a sort of curse that we don't want this person around. This is uncleanness. Okay, it's gross, it's disgusting. The lepers, it's really a shame. God bless them, but they can't be with us. And so here's this great and powerful man, but he gets this disease, which ends his career, which basically ends his life as an ordinary person interacting in his society. So this is a big problem for him. So now moving on to verse 2. Now bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria," that's the capital of Israel, "he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. Now, by the way, if we had 10 sets of clothing today, that would be fairly inexpensive, especially thanks to, like mass production, right? But that other stuff, the gold and silver, we don't weigh stuff in talents and in shekels anymore. But I did the calculations earlier this week, and that weight of silver and gold today, what it's worth on the market today, is $3.5 million. This is a vast sum of money. This is a huge amount of money that Naaman, either it's all his own or it's also from the king of Aram as well, because the king of Aram is like, I need to get Naaman back on the battlefield, man. This is worth it to me. This is an investment in our military to get this guy healed because he's that good, okay? But whatever, he's taking a huge amount of money, okay? And so we see in verse 6, the letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." So again, just imagine this, right? So here's Naaman, or here's the king of Israel. He's in Samaria, and he starts to hear these reports from the boundary, from the border, that there is this large Aramean force with General Naaman, with horses and chariots and men, and they are coming, but they are flying a flag of truce, saying, "We want safe passage to come to Samaria." And here they come, and the king of Israel decides, okay, let them come. I don't know what's going on here, but we'll let them in. And they travel all the way up to the gates of Samaria. And so here's this enemy force under flag of truce that these countries are fighting back and forth all the time, that's right there in front of the gates of Samaria with this huge amount of money and a letter from the king saying, "Please heal my general." So here's what happens. Verse 7, as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." He thinks that what's going to happen is that he's going to say, "Sorry, I don't have the power to heal from leprosy here," and that Naaman's going to say, "Oh, too bad." Boom, and conquer Samaria. And the king of Israel thinks, this guy is tougher than we are. His army is bigger and better than ours is. We can't survive. We can't fight back. So verse 8, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. I mean, can you imagine, Elisha's house? There's a whole huge army, right in front, knocking at the door of his house. Okay, Elisha doesn't even go to the door. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan," that is the Jordan River, "and your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed. Have a nice day." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out and stand to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than," that's the capital of Aram, by the way, "better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Okay, so Naaman has this thought in his mind of how this is all going to shake down. And it doesn't happen that way. And he's ticked. He's upset. What's the deal? Right? I came all this way for this? I mean, I could have taken a bath at home, right? That's the best you can do. He's frustrated. He's upset. He's disappointed. He had high hopes. He had high expectations, right? But then some really interesting wisdom comes from his servants. Verse 13, Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed. And you think about it, and you think, okay, so Naaman was willing to take $3.5 million. You know, $3.5 million. And this large military force. And to go all the way to Israel. And to go all the way to the prophet Elisha's house to ask for healing. And his servants say, my master, if you're willing to do that, and if he had told you to do some other remarkable thing, like if he had told you to go to Egypt to be healed, you would have gone. If he had told you to like stand on your head for 4 days, you would be doing it right now. All he told you to do was something simple. Why not do that? And what's interesting about it and ironic about it is I've experienced that in my own life. And maybe you have too. We don't want to follow directions. We want to be healed as long as we're healed our way. We want to be healed as long as it fits our thought of how that healing was going to take place. We want to be healed as long as somebody else doesn't tell us what to do. Or if they do tell us what to do, we are sitting in the position of authority to decide whether or not we're going to do it. We want to be healed, so we go to the best surgeon in the country, and he says, do this. And we say, no, I'm going to get a second opinion. You know, I've known people, maybe you've known people, maybe you are this person, I don't know, who will go from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor until they find the doctor that says what they want to hear. People do this, right? We don't want to take directions. We resist following the simple instruction. But the simple instruction was important for Naaman. Because again, God wanted to heal Naaman of more than just his leprosy. God wanted more for Naaman than what Naaman asked for. So we look here in verse 14. So he decided to do it. He went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept now a gift from your servant, $3.5 million. The prophet answered, no thanks. I'm good. As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon, that was the Aramean god, to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elisha said. See, Naaman was just coming for one healing. He wanted to be healed of his leprosy. But see, God also wanted to heal Naaman of his pride. God also wanted to heal Naaman of his idolatry. See, there's this theme through this whole thing about where is the real God? Where is the real God, right? You've got all these different gods and all these different nations worshiping their own God. Where's the real God? And the servant girl says to Naaman's wife, there's a prophet in Israel who can do this. And he goes to Israel, he goes to the prophet in Israel and says, go to this river in Israel and be cleansed. And he does, and Naaman comes back to the prophet and says, now I know that the only God is in Israel. There is no God in all the world. The God that I've been used to worshiping, the gods that all the other nations are worshiping, do not exist. They are nothing. The only God is in Israel, because this is the only place that what I just experienced could ever happen. It's never happened anywhere else but right here. And so he takes this dirt from Israel so that when he goes back home, he can put that dirt on the ground and build an altar on it and sacrifice to the God of Israel on Israeli soil back in Syria, back in Iran. And that's what God wanted to show Naaman. He wanted to give Naaman the path to eternal life. Not just the healing of his body, but the healing of his soul. And that was only going to happen if Naaman would surrender his pride and follow directions. I talked last week about a time when I was in seminary that I was really struggling over this bad behavior that I kept lapsing into. And I talked about a conversation with a professor in the seminary who gave me hope when I didn't have hope. And I said that that was a turning point for me, and it was. But it only turned me so far. And the second big turning point came about a year later, living in a different place, and though my behavior was somewhat better, it wasn't better. And there was a man in my church at that time who knew about my weakness, who knew about my problem, and invited me to come and to meet with him and another group of guys who supported each other in that. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it because I thought, okay, my problem is bad, but it's not as bad as their problem is. My problem is bad, but I think I can figure it out. And all along the way, at different times when I would go to people for help, and I would want to get help, and I'd want to get good advice, then they would give me their advice, and then I would process, okay, does this sound like something that I want to do or not? Is this a cost that I'm willing to pay, or is this a cost that I am not willing to pay? Do I really need to go to those lengths to get healed? I don't know, that seems a bit extreme. Let me go part way and see if that gets it done. But I got to a point where I got so desperate that I was finally willing to show up one night to that guy and to that guy's group. And it was because I got to a point that I finally realized, the light bulb came on. I mean, it was a duh moment that I realized if I'm so smart and if I'm so good at sorting out the good advice from the not good advice, the relevant advice from the irrelevant advice, I would be pure right now. If I was that good at sorting it out, I wouldn't have this problem. So maybe what I need to do is take my hands off the wheel and basically do anything that anybody tells me, because it can't possibly be worse than what I'm doing right now. And that, my friends, was really the beginning of my healing. And I found that in the course of just sitting like a child and saying, whatever you tell me to do, I will do. Whatever you tell me to give up, I will give up. Wherever you tell me to be, I will be there at the time that you tell me to be there. I will just do it. I will assume that you know better than I know, because somebody had a whole lot more experience than I had. Then I started to not just get healing in the thing that I wanted to get healed, but there was all kinds of other brokenness in my life that I didn't even know was there that started to get healed as a result of that. You see what I mean? And God, in his mercy, allowed me to keep screwing up until my pride was broken to the point that I would be willing to be healed of everything, not just the one thing, and be willing to take direction and no longer be wise in my own estimation. And in that way, I started to live a lot more abundant life. And you can too. The brokenness in your life, whether it's in your body, with yourself, with others, or with the wider world, I don't know if you haven't gotten the healing yet because of simply God's timing. Again, that story I told at the beginning, that woman was in bondage for 18 years just so that she could wait long enough for Jesus to show up and heal her, right? And that had nothing to do with any of her problem. She was innocent in that, but it was just God's timing. And that might be the case for you, but it might not. You might not be healed yet of the thing that is the searing pain and injury and hole and damage within you, because you just want to get this much healed and not this much healed. Or because you don't want to take direction from the person who can really help you, or from the scriptures that can really help you. Today is the day for healing, people. Today is the day to be healed. I'm going to invite you to take this card out from the bulletin.